Ma'am, I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back. Jasmine Coleman kept her voice steady despite the cold metal of handcuffs biting into her wrists. Officer, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm here for the legal symposium inside the... Save it. Sheriff Jack Cooper's voice cut through the humid afternoon air like a blade. Fire lane's a fire lane, and you were parked there for 20 minutes. That's a violation, and your attitude just upgraded it to obstruction. The small crowd gathering outside the Riverside Civic Center pulled out their phones instinctively. Jasmine could hear the soft chimes of recording beginning, could feel the weight of a dozen eyes watching this moment that would soon belong to the internet forever. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to remain the calm, composed woman she'd trained herself to be through years of facing rooms full of hostile law students and skeptical colleagues. I understand your concern about the fire lane, Jasmine said, her voice carrying the kind of patient authority that came from explaining complex legal concepts to first-year students. But if you'll check with the event coordinators inside, you'll find that attendees were directed to use that area for temporary parking during. Lady, I don't care if God himself told you to park there. Cooper tightened his grip on her elbow, steering her toward his patrol car with unnecessary force. You think because you talk fancy you can lawyer your way out of this? I've heard every excuse in the book. The irony struck Jasmine with such force she almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she filed away every detail of this interaction in the part of her mind that had been cataloging constitutional violations since law school. The excessive force. The racial profiling. The deliberate dismissal of her attempts to explain. Each element would matter later. Sheriff Cooper, she said, reading his nameplate as he pushed her toward the vehicle. That is your name, isn't it? I want to make sure I have the details correct for. For what? Your complaint? Your lawsuit? Cooper's laugh was harsh. Sweetheart, you picked the wrong town to try that victim routine. Jasmine felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not fear. She'd moved beyond fear somewhere between her third year of law school and her first civil rights case. This was something more dangerous. This was the recognition of a system so convinced of its own righteousness that it couldn't see its own corruption. I'm not playing any routine, she said quietly. I'm simply exercising my rights under the 4th and 14th Amendments too. There she goes with the lawyer talk again. Cooper turned to address the growing crowd, his voice taking on a theatrical quality. See how they do this, folks? Break the law, then hide behind fancy words when they get caught. A young woman in the crowd called out. Hey, she was just trying to explain. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back, Cooper barked. This is official police business. Jasmine watched the woman hesitate, then comply, and felt a familiar ache in her chest. How many times had she seen this exact dynamic play out in courtrooms, in classrooms, in the case studies that filled her academic papers? The authority figure who wielded power like a weapon, the citizen who knew something was wrong but lacked the tools to challenge it, and the system that protected itself by making resistance seem impossible. But Jasmine Coleman had spent 15 years learning exactly how to make the impossible possible. As Cooper opened the rear door of his patrol car, Jasmine caught sight of her reflection in the window. 42 years old, dressed in the conservative navy suit she'd chosen specifically for today's presentation on police accountability and constitutional law. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was about to become a case study in her own research. Sheriff, she said, her voice carrying a new note. Not anger, not fear, but something that made Cooper pause despite himself. Before you continue with this arrest, I need to inform you that I'm Professor Jasmine Coleman from Georgetown University Law School. I'm here at the invitation of your city council to conduct training on constitutional policing practices. The symposium I was attending? It's specifically about preventing exactly this kind of situation. For the first time since the encounter began, Cooper hesitated. Jasmine saw it in the slight loosening of his grip, the way his eyes flickered toward the civic center, the sudden uncertainty that crept across his features. But then his jaw set in the stubborn line she recognized from 1,000 depositions, 1,000 cross-examinations of officers who'd convinced themselves that being wrong was impossible. Nice try, he said, shoving her into the back seat. But I wasn't born yesterday. Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you're watching from. As the door slammed shut, Jasmine closed her eyes and began mentally composing what she knew would become one of the most important legal documents of her career. Not just the inevitable lawsuit, though that would come. Not just the complaint to the Justice Department, though that was already taking shape in her mind. No, what Jasmine Coleman was composing was something far more dangerous to Sheriff Jack Cooper and the system he represented. A methodical, unassailable dismantling of everything he thought he knew about the law he'd sworn to uphold. She opened her eyes and looked directly into the dashboard camera she knew was recording everything. This is Professor Jasmine Coleman, employee identification number 47291, Georgetown University Law School. The time is approximately 2:47 p.m., and I am being unlawfully detained by Sheriff Jack Cooper of Riverside County. I want it noted for the record that I have clearly identified myself, explained my lawful presence at this location, and received no Miranda warning. I am invoking my right to counsel and my right to remain silent. Through the partition, she could see Cooper's shoulders tense. Good. Let him think about that dashboard camera. Let him think about those phones recording outside. Let him think about what his sergeant was going to say when he brought in a Georgetown law professor for parking in a spot the city had designated for symposium attendees. But as the car pulled away from the civic center, Jasmine realized that Cooper's education in constitutional law was about to begin whether he wanted it or not. And she was going to be his teacher. The question wasn't whether justice would be served. Jasmine had made a career of ensuring it was. The question was whether Sheriff Jack Cooper would survive the lesson with his badge intact. Outside the windows, Riverside slipped past. A small town convinced of its own righteousness, about to discover that Professor Jasmine Coleman didn't just teach constitutional law. She wielded it. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department occupied a low brick building that looked like it had been designed in the 1970s and never updated. As Cooper parked, Jasmine noted the faded American flag, the peeling paint around the entrance, and the way the fluorescent lights flickered through dirty windows. Small details that spoke to larger truths about budget priorities and institutional neglect. "Out!" Cooper commanded, opening her door. Jasmine emerged with the same measured dignity she'd maintained throughout the arrest. Her academic mind was already cataloging everything. The absence of female officers during her processing, the way Cooper's hand lingered too long on her shoulder, the dismissive glances from deputies who assumed they knew exactly what kind of person gets arrested in broad daylight. At the booking desk, Sergeant Maria Santos looked up from her paperwork. Jasmine caught something in the woman's eyes, a flicker of recognition, quickly suppressed. "What V we got, Jack?" Santos asked, not meeting Jasmine's gaze. "Fire lane violation, escalated to obstruction and disorderly conduct." Cooper dropped Jasmine's purse on the counter with unnecessary force. She was giving me the runaround, trying to confuse the issue with legal mumbo-jumbo. Santos's fingers paused over her keyboard. "Legal mumbo-jumbo? Claims she's some kind of professor. Georgetown, she says." Cooper's laugh was ugly. "Right. And I'm the Chief Justice." Jasmine watched Santos's face carefully. The sergeant definitely recognized her name. Jasmine could see it in the way her breathing changed, the slight widening of her eyes. But instead of speaking up, Santos simply continued typing. "Professor Jasmine Coleman," Jasmine said clearly. "CULEMAN, employee identification number 47291. I'm here at the invitation of your city council." "Save the performance," Cooper snapped. "Book her." Santos hesitated again, her fingers hovering over the keys. For a moment, Jasmine thought the sergeant might speak up, might prevent this situation from spiraling further out of control. Instead, Santos looked away and continued processing the paperwork. The betrayal stung more than Jasmine expected. Not because she was naive about police solidarity, she'd been studying it for years, but because she'd seen something in Santos's eyes that suggested the woman knew better, and had chosen silence anyway. As they moved through the booking process, Jasmine learned more about Sheriff Cooper than his personnel file would ever reveal. He was 48, divorced, 22 years on the force. His uniform was immaculate, his weapon cleaned and properly maintained. He did everything by the book, except when it came to actually understanding what the book said. "You know what your problem is?" Cooper said as he removed her handcuffs for fingerprinting. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you. Think because you went to some fancy school, you're above the law." Jasmine studied his face as she pressed her fingers to the ink pad. There was genuine conviction there, genuine belief that he was serving justice. It was almost tragic. "Almost. Sheriff Cooper," she said quietly, "what exactly do you think I did wrong?" "You parked in a fire lane." Did you verify that the area was actually designated as a fire lane during today's event? Cooper's jaw tightened. I don't need to verify anything. I know every inch of this town. When was the last time you reviewed the temporary traffic modifications filed with the city for special events? I don't have time for. When was the last time you attended training on constitutional policing practices? Cooper slammed his hand on the counter, making Santos jump. Lady, I've been enforcing the law since before you were old enough to vote. Don't lecture me about my job. Jasmine smiled. Not the confrontational smile of someone trying to provoke a reaction, but the patient smile of a teacher watching a student work through a difficult problem. Actually, Sheriff, I've been voting since I was 18. That was 24 years ago. And I've been studying constitutional law for 20 years. Teaching it for 15. Publishing papers on police accountability for 12. She watched the mathematics hit him. The realization that she wasn't some young activist trying to make trouble, but a middle-aged professional with decades of expertise in exactly the areas he claimed to understand. So when I tell you that you violated my 4th and 14th Amendment rights, Jasmine continued, I'm not giving you legal mumbo-jumbo. I'm giving you my professional assessment based on 15 years of research into exactly this type of situation. The booking room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Jasmine could see Santos pretending to focus on her paperwork while listening to every word. She could see Deputy Kevin Walsh, a young officer she'd noticed earlier, standing frozen in the doorway with a file folder in his hands. Cooper's face had gone red. You think your fancy degrees make you better than us? Think they give you the right to park wherever you want? I think my education gives me the ability to recognize when someone's civil rights are being violated, Jasmine replied. And right now, that someone is me. Through the station's front windows, Jasmine could see a news van pulling into the parking lot. Then another. Someone had called the media, probably one of the bystanders with their phones. The situation was about to become very public, very quickly. Cooper saw the vans too. His confident demeanor cracked slightly. Santos, get her processed and into holding. Now. Jack, Santos said carefully, maybe we should. I said now. Jasmine watched the interplay between them with professional interest. Santos clearly had concerns about the arrest, but lacked either the authority or the courage to voice them directly. It was a perfect example of how institutional hierarchies could perpetuate injustice, even when individual officers knew better. As Santos led her toward the holding cells, Jasmine caught sight of Deputy Walsh approaching Cooper with an expression of barely controlled panic. Sheriff, Walsh said in a voice loud enough for Jasmine to hear. I just got off the phone with City Hall. They're asking about. Not now, Walsh. But sir, they said something about a symposium, and... Cooper grabbed Walsh's arm and steered him away from Jasmine's hearing. But she'd caught enough. City Hall was already involved. The truth was starting to surface. In the holding cell, a small, clean room with basic amenities, Jasmine sat on the narrow bench and allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Not just the arrest itself, but the systematic way each person in the chain had failed to prevent it. Cooper's initial prejudice, Santos's silence, Walsh's delayed intervention. Each small failure had contributed to a larger injustice. But Jasmine Coleman hadn't survived 20 years in academia and legal advocacy by giving up when systems failed. She'd survived by learning how to use those very systems against themselves. She closed her eyes and began to plan. Outside the holding cell, Jasmine could hear voices rising in heated discussion. Through the small window in the door, she watched Deputy Walsh pace back and forth, his cell phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing frantically. Whatever conversation he was having, it wasn't going well. The door to the station's front entrance burst open, and Jasmine heard a voice that made her heart skip, not with fear, but with something more complicated. Something she hadn't felt in months. Where is she? Where is Professor Coleman? Raymond Thompson strode into the station like a man accustomed to having doors opened for him. At 38, he carried himself with the confident authority of someone who'd spent a decade as a civil rights attorney before transitioning into police reform consulting. Jasmine knew him by reputation. Brilliant, uncompromising, and dangerous to anyone who underestimated him because of his easy smile and South Carolina drawl. She also knew him personally, though neither of them had acknowledged it publicly. 3 years ago, at a conference in Atlanta, they'd spent one perfect weekend together, talking about law and justice and the future they both wanted to build. Then they'd return to their separate lives, separate cities, separate careers that made anything more than friendship impossible. Or so they'd told themselves. "Sir, you need to calm down," Cooper was saying, his voice carrying a new note of uncertainty. "I need to calm down?" Raymond's laugh was sharp. "Sheriff, do you have any idea what you've just done?" Jasmine pressed her face to the window, watching the confrontation unfold. Raymond wore the kind of perfectly tailored suit that suggested success without arrogance, and his presence seemed to fill the entire room. But it was more than his clothes or his bearing. It was the way every deputy in the room suddenly looked smaller, less certain of themselves. "I arrested someone for violating the law," Cooper said, but his conviction was wavering. "You arrested Professor Jasmine Coleman, one of the country's leading experts on constitutional policing, for parking in a spot that the city specifically designated for symposium attendees." Raymond pulled out his phone and began scrolling through documents. "I have the emails right here. The ones your city council sent to all attendees, directing them to use that exact area for temporary parking." Santos, who had been silent throughout Jasmine's processing, suddenly found her voice. "Jack, maybe we should." "Maybe you should what?" Cooper snapped, but Jasmine could hear the desperation creeping into his tone. "Maybe you should let me see my client," Raymond said, his voice dropping to a quieter register that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "Before this gets any worse for you." She didn't ask for a lawyer. She shouldn't have to ask for one when her civil rights are being violated. Raymond pulled out a business card and handed it to Cooper with deliberate ceremony. "Raymond Thompson, Thompson and Associates. We specialize in police misconduct cases. And Sheriff, this is about to become the most expensive parking ticket in your department's history." Through the window, Jasmine watched Cooper's face cycle through emotions: anger, confusion, fear, and finally a desperate kind of calculation. He was beginning to understand that he'd made a mistake, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it directly. 5 minutes, Cooper said finally. 10, Raymond countered. "And somewhere private where we can discuss the constitutional violations that are continuing to pile up with every minute she remains in that cell." Cooper led Raymond toward the holding area, and Jasmine stepped back from the window, smoothing her jacket and checking her reflection in the metal mirror. She'd been in custody for less than 2 hours, but it felt like days. Her professional composure was intact, but underneath it, she could feel something shifting. Anger, yes, but also a fierce kind of joy. Cooper had just given her the perfect platform to demonstrate everything wrong with the system she'd been studying for decades. The door opened and Raymond stepped inside. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the small space. Two people who'd chosen careers over romance, duty over desire, and were now facing the consequences of that choice in the most unexpected way. "Professor Coleman," Raymond said formally, though his eyes held warmth that contradicted his tone. "I'm Raymond Thompson, your attorney. Are you injured? Have they provided you with food, water, medical attention?" "I'm fine," Jasmine replied, matching his formal tone while fighting the urge to smile. "Though I suspect my situation is about to improve dramatically." "It is." Raymond moved closer, ostensibly to discuss her case, but Jasmine caught the subtle way he positioned himself between her and the door, protecting her privacy for these precious few minutes. "Jasmine, what the hell happened out there?" "Exactly what I've been writing about for 15 years, she said. "A law enforcement officer who confused authority with immunity, prejudice with instinct, and power with righteousness." Raymond shook his head. "Cooper's career is over. He just doesn't know it yet." "Raymond," Jasmine reached out and touched his arm. A simple gesture that carried years of unspoken conversation. "This isn't about ending careers. This is about starting conversations. Real ones." He studied her face, reading the layers of meaning beneath her words. "You're not just going to file a complaint and move on, are you? I'm going to use this." Jasmine gestured around the cell. "All of it. The arrest, the processing, the way Santos stayed silent when she knew better, the way Cooper doubled down instead of listening. I'm going to turn this into the case study that changes how police departments in small towns across America think about accountability." Raymond was quiet for a long moment. "That's going to require staying in Riverside longer than you planned." "I know. It's going to mean working together. Closely." "I know that too." Their eyes met, and Jasmine saw the same complicated mixture of professional respect and personal longing that she felt. 3 years ago, they'd walked away from each other because the timing wasn't right, because their careers demanded different things, because love seemed like a luxury they couldn't afford. But standing in this holding cell, surrounded by the evidence of systemic injustice they'd both dedicated their lives to fighting, Jasmine wondered if they'd been wrong. Maybe love wasn't a luxury at all. Maybe it was the fuel that made the fight worthwhile. "We should discuss strategy," Raymond said, but he didn't step back. "We should," Jasmine agreed, but she didn't lower her hand from his arm. Outside the cell, they could hear Cooper's voice rising again, stressed and angry. The sound of phones ringing constantly. The measured voice of what sounded like a superior officer trying to understand what had happened. "Jasmine," Raymond said quietly, "this is going to get ugly. Cooper's not going to go down quietly, and there are going to be people in this town who see you as an outsider coming in to destroy their way of life." "Let them," Jasmine said. "I've been fighting ugliness my whole career. The only difference is this time, I have home field advantage." "How do you figure?" Jasmine smiled. Not the patient-teacher smile she'd worn with Cooper, but something fiercer, more predatory. "Because this time, I'm not just studying the system from the outside. I'm trapped inside it. And Raymond, I know exactly how to break out." 2 hours later, Jasmine walked out of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department a free woman, technically. The charges had been dropped after a frantic call from Mayor Patricia Henley, but the damage was already done. News vans lined the street, reporters thrust microphones at her face, and social media was ablaze with hashtags that would trend for days. But Jasmine's focus was on the man standing beside Cooper at the department's entrance, watching her emergence with calculating eyes. Chief Deputy Russell Blake was everything Cooper wasn't: calm, intelligent, politically savvy, and infinitely more dangerous because of it. "Professor Coleman," Blake approached with his hand extended, his smile perfectly calibrated to suggest both apology and authority. "I'm Chief Deputy Blake. I want to personally apologize for this unfortunate misunderstanding." Jasmine shook his hand, noting the firm grip, the direct eye contact, the way he positioned himself slightly between her and the cameras. This wasn't an apology, it was damage control. "Misunderstanding," Jasmine repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" Emotions were running high, mistakes were made on both sides. "Excuse me." Jasmine's voice cut through his practiced charm like a scalpel. "What mistake did I make, exactly?" Blake's smile faltered for just a moment, long enough for Jasmine to see the frustration beneath his diplomatic facade. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private? I'd hate for the media to mischaracterize our conversation." "The media is welcome to accurately characterize it," Jasmine replied. "Unless you have something to hide, Chief Deputy Blake?" Behind Blake, Cooper stood rigid, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Jasmine could see the calculation in his eyes, the desperate need to salvage something from this disaster. But it was Blake who worried her. Cooper was a blunt instrument, predictable in his prejudices. Blake was smart enough to be subtle, connected enough to be truly dangerous. "Look, Professor," Blake said, his voice taking on a more intimate tone. "We both know this was blown out of proportion. Sheriff Cooper made an honest mistake. You were understandably upset, but at the end of the day, nobody was hurt. Why don't we all just move forward?" Jasmine felt Raymond's hand touch her back, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone in this. Around them, the crowd of reporters pressed closer, sensing tension beneath the polite words. "Chief Deputy Blake," Jasmine said, her voice carrying clearly to the microphones. "Are you suggesting that civil rights violations should be overlooked if nobody gets physically injured?" "That's not what I. Are you suggesting that racial profiling is just an honest mistake that we should all move past?" "Professor Coleman, I think you're mischaracterizing." "I'm quoting your words back to you," Jasmine said. "If that feels like mischaracterization, perhaps you should choose your words more carefully." Blake's diplomatic mask slipped completely. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you seem determined to turn a simple misunderstanding into some kind of federal case." Jasmine smiled. "Funny you should mention that. Raymond." Raymond stepped forward, his briefcase in hand. "Chief Deputy Blake, Sheriff Cooper, you've been served." He handed each man a set of documents. "Federal civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983, filed 1 hour ago. The United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia will be very interested in your department's policies regarding racial profiling, excessive force, and civil rights training." The color drained from Blake's face. "You can't be serious." "Deadly serious," Raymond replied. "We're also filing complaints with the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division and requesting a full investigation of your department's practices." Cooper finally found his voice. "This is insane. I arrested someone for parking illegally. You arrested a law professor for being black in your town, Jasmine said quietly. There's a difference, Sheriff Cooper. And by the time this is over, you're going to understand exactly what that difference is. As the crowd of reporters erupted with questions, Jasmine noticed a woman standing at the edge of the scene, watching with intense interest. She was young, maybe late 20s, with the alert eyes and quick movements of an experienced journalist. But something about her felt different, more personal than the other media representatives. The woman caught Jasmine's attention and held it for a moment, then melted back into the crowd before Jasmine could process what she'd seen in those eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or something more concerning. We need to get you out of here, Raymond murmured in her ear. Jasmine nodded, but as they pushed through the crowd toward his car, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. Cooper and Blake weren't going to simply accept defeat. They had too much to lose, too much invested in maintaining the status quo. In the car, as Raymond navigated through the small downtown area toward Jasmine's hotel, she finally allowed herself to feel the full emotional weight of what had happened. Not just the arrest, she'd been through worse, but the systematic way every person in the process had failed to prevent it, even when they knew better. Santos knew who I was, she said suddenly. Raymond glanced at her in the rearview mirror. What? Sergeant Santos. She recognized my name when Cooper was booking me. I could see it in her face. But she stayed quiet. Institutional pressure, Raymond said. Classic blue wall mentality. Maybe. Jasmine stared out the window at the neat suburban houses, the well-maintained lawns, the American flags hanging from front porches. Or maybe something else. Raymond, I need you to do some research on Santos. And Blake. And anyone else who was involved in processing my arrest. Jasmine, you're talking about a small-town police department. What kind of secrets could they possibly have? Jasmine thought about Blake's calculated charm, Santos's selective blindness, Cooper's absolute certainty that he was in the right. The kind that destroy lives when they're exposed. And Raymond, I think we're about to expose them all. As they pulled into the hotel parking lot, Jasmine's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Asterisk, some secrets are worth protecting. Some fights aren't worth having. Consider this friendly advice. Asterisk. Jasmine showed the message to Raymond, watching his expression shift from concern to anger. We need to involve the FBI, he said immediately. No. Jasmine deleted the message. We need to be smarter than they are. Whoever sent this just made a crucial mistake. They assumed I'd be intimidated. Jasmine gathered her purse, her mind already racing through possibilities. They don't understand that I've spent my entire career studying people who use threats to maintain power. And Raymond, I know exactly how to dismantle them. The Riverside Inn was the kind of small-town hotel that prided itself on Southern hospitality, which Jasmine discovered meant friendly smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes and service that grew noticeably cooler after the staff recognized her from the evening news. She'd chosen to stay rather than drive back to Georgetown because she sensed this story wasn't over, and because Raymond was here, and she wasn't quite ready to examine what that meant. At 11 p.m., she sat in her room reviewing case files, preparing for what she knew would be a long legal battle. Her laptop was open to a half-finished email to her department chair, explaining why she needed to take an extended leave of absence. Outside her window, the parking lot was quiet except for the occasional car passing on Main Street. The knock on her door was so soft she almost missed it. Jasmine approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to see Sergeant Maria Santos standing in the hallway, out of uniform, looking nervously over her shoulder. Professor Coleman? Could I speak with you for a moment? Jasmine opened the door, studying Santos's face. The woman looked exhausted, stressed in a way that went beyond a difficult day at work. Sergeant Santos, this is unexpected. I know I shouldn't be here. But Santos glanced down the hallway again. Can I come in? Please. Jasmine stepped aside, watching as Santos entered and immediately moved away from the window, as if afraid of being seen from outside. You want to tell me what's really going on? Jasmine asked. Santos sat heavily in the room's single chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I should have spoken up today. When Cooper brought you in, when I saw your name on the paperwork, I knew exactly who you were. I've read your papers, Professor. The ones about police accountability, about implicit bias training. I even cited them in my master's thesis. Jasmine felt a shock of recognition. You have a master's degree? Criminal Justice, Virginia Commonwealth University. Graduated 3 years ago. Santos looked up, and Jasmine saw intelligence and ambition warring with fear in her eyes. I came to Riverside because I thought I could make a difference in a small department. Thought I could help change things from the inside. But Russell Blake had other ideas. Jasmine sat on the edge of the bed, sensing they were approaching something crucial. Tell me about Blake. Santos was quiet for a long moment, and Jasmine could see her weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. Blake runs this department, not Cooper. Cooper's the face, the local boy made good, but Blake makes the real decisions. He's smart, connected, ambitious. He's got his eye on the sheriff's job when Cooper retires, and eventually maybe state office. And he's been systematically covering up problems in this department for years. Excessive force complaints that disappear. Evidence that gets mislaid in cases involving his friends. Officers who ask too many questions getting transferred or squeezed out. Jasmine leaned forward. Do you have proof? Santos reached into her jacket and pulled out a flash drive. 3 years' worth of incident reports, internal memos, budget allocations that don't add up. Everything I've been collecting since I figured out what was really happening here. Jasmine stared at the drive. Why are you giving this to me? Because what happened to you today? That was just the beginning. Blake's not going to let this lawsuit go forward without a fight. He's going to try to destroy you, Professor. Your reputation, your credibility, maybe even your safety. And he's got the connections to do it. What kind of connections? His brother-in-law is State Senator David Cameron. His college roommate is FBI agent Tom Cooper. Yes, same last name, they're cousins. His girlfriend works in the district attorney's office. Santos stood and moved toward the window, peering through the curtains. Blake's got protection at every level, Professor. He's untouchable. Jasmine felt the familiar thrill of a complex case unfolding, pieces clicking into place. Unless someone with the right credentials and the right platform exposes him publicly. Exactly. Santos turned back to her. But Professor, you need to understand, if you do this, if you go after Blake, he's going to come after everyone around you. Your family, your colleagues, She glanced meaningfully toward the door. Your attorney. The threat to Raymond hit Jasmine like a physical blow. She'd been thinking of this as her fight, her risk to take. But Blake wouldn't discriminate. He'd target anyone who posed a threat to his carefully constructed empire. There's something else, Santos said quietly. That woman at the press conference today, the one with the cameras? She wasn't a journalist. Who was she? Private investigator. Blake hired her 6 months ago when he heard rumors that someone might be looking into the department. Her name's Kelly Foster, and she's very good at finding pressure points. Jasmine's phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Asterisk. Your colleague Dr. Amanda Walsh received some interesting photos tonight. Academic misconduct is such a serious charge these days. Asterisk. Jasmine's blood went cold. Amanda was her research partner, her closest friend at Georgetown, and currently under consideration for department chair. Any hint of scandal would destroy her career. Santos saw Jasmine's expression and nodded grimly. It's starting, Professor. Blake's offensive. Whatever he's got on Dr. Walsh, it's probably fabricated, but it'll take months to prove that. By then, the damage will be done. Jasmine looked at the flash drive in her hands, then at Santos's worried face. Why are you risking this? If Blake has as much power as you say, helping me could destroy your career too. Santos smiled sadly. Professor, I became a cop because I believed in justice. Real justice, not the kind that depends on your skin color or your zip code. What happened to you today was wrong, and staying silent makes me part of the problem. Jasmine's phone rang. Raymond. Jasmine, are you okay? I just got a call from someone claiming to have compromising photos of you and me from 3 years ago. They're threatening to release them unless we drop the lawsuit. Jasmine closed her eyes, feeling the full weight of Blake's strategy. He wasn't just attacking her case. He was attacking everything and everyone she cared about. Her career, her friends, her relationship with Raymond before it could even begin again. I'm fine, she said. But Raymond, we need to meet. Tonight. And bring everything you have on Blake and his connections. After she hung up, Santos was watching her with sympathy. He's good at this, Professor. Blake. He's been destroying people quietly for years. You're just his biggest target yet. Jasmine stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street that masked so much corruption. In her academic work, she'd always been the outside observer, the expert who analyzed systems from a safe distance. But now she was inside the system, trapped in it, with everything she'd built at risk. "Sergeant Santos," she said finally, "how would you like to help me teach Blake that some people can't be destroyed quietly?" Santos straightened, and Jasmine saw the cop she'd hoped to become reflected in her eyes. "Tell me what you need, Professor." Jasmine smiled, but it wasn't the patient smile of a teacher anymore. It was something harder, more dangerous. "I need to show Blake that he picked the wrong law professor to intimidate. And I need to do it before he destroys everyone I care about." Outside, a car drove slowly through the parking lot, its headlights sweeping across Jasmine's window. Santos moved quickly away from the glass. "He's watching," she said quietly. "Let him watch," Jasmine replied. "By the time I'm finished, Blake's going to wish he'd never heard my name." At midnight, Jasmine sat in Raymond's rental car in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, feeling like a character in someone else's story. The flash drive Santos had given her was plugged into Raymond's laptop, and the files scrolling across the screen painted a picture of corruption that went far deeper than she'd imagined. "Jesus Christ," Raymond muttered, opening another folder. "Jasmine, look at this. Blake's been skimming from the drug seizure fund for 3 years. Nearly $500,000. Jasmine leaned over to see the spreadsheet Santos had compiled. "And using department resources to investigate his political opponents. Look at this. Surveillance reports on city council members who voted against budget increases. Here's something about evidence tampering in the Hendricks case. That was the sexual assault that got dismissed last year, wasn't it?" Jasmine nodded grimly. She remembered reading about it in the local paper. A young woman's credibility destroyed when key evidence mysteriously disappeared from the property room. Blake's been protecting predators while destroying their victims. Santos was right. He's untouchable because he makes himself indispensable to the wrong people. Raymond's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went white. "Jasmine, we have a problem." He showed her the screen. Photos of them together from 3 years ago. Intimate moments from their weekend in Atlanta that someone had clearly taken with a telephoto lens. The images were accompanied by text suggesting an ongoing affair and academic corruption involving grants and research positions. "How did they?" Jasmine started. "Blake's investigator," Raymond said. "Santos warned us she was good." Jasmine's phone rang immediately. Her department chair, Dr. Richard Stevens, calling at midnight. "Jasmine, I just received some very disturbing photographs via email. I think we need to discuss your immediate return to Georgetown and possible suspension pending investigation." "Richard, those photos are 3 years old, and there was nothing improper about." "Jasmine, the email also included financial records suggesting irregularities in your research funding, possible conflicts of interest involving your civil rights work, and questions about your objectivity in cases involving Attorney Thompson." Jasmine felt the walls closing in. "Richard, this is clearly a smear campaign designed to discredit my lawsuit. You can't possibly." "I'm sorry, Jasmine. The university can't be associated with this kind of scandal. You need to return to Georgetown immediately or face formal disciplinary action." The line went dead. Jasmine stared at her phone, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. In the space of 6 hours, Blake had managed to threaten her career, her reputation, and her relationship with Raymond. He'd turned her own university against her, made her radioactive to the institution she'd served for 15 years. "There's more," Raymond said quietly, scrolling through his own emails. "My law firm received a complaint alleging that I violated ethics rules by taking your case due to our personal relationship. The Virginia State Bar is opening an investigation." Jasmine felt tears pricking her eyes, not from sadness but from pure rage. "He's good. I'll give him that." "Jasmine, maybe we should." "What? Give up? Let him win." Raymond was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "I'm just saying, maybe Santos was right. Maybe Blake really is untouchable. Maybe some fights aren't worth the cost." Jasmine stared at him, seeing her own doubts reflected in his eyes. For the first time since this began, she felt truly alone. Even Raymond, who'd fought civil rights battles across the South, was ready to surrender. "You think I should drop the lawsuit? I think I don't want to see you destroyed over a parking ticket." "It's not about the parking ticket, Raymond. It's never been about the parking ticket. I know that. But Jasmine, what if we can't win? What if Blake really does have too much protection, too many connections? What if fighting him costs you everything you've built?" Jasmine looked out at the empty highway stretching into darkness, thinking about her students at Georgetown, the young lawyers she'd trained, the research that had taken her decades to compile. Blake was offering her a choice, her principles or her career, her integrity or her future. It was the same choice Santos had faced when she'd stayed silent during the arrest. The same choice faced by every person who'd ever watched injustice unfold and calculated whether speaking up was worth the personal cost. "Raymond," she said finally, "3 years ago, you asked me why I chose law over everything else. Remember what I told you?" Raymond's voice was soft. "You said some things are more important than happiness." "I was wrong." Jasmine turned to face him fully. "Some things are more important than safety, more important than career, more important than the comfortable life we build when we compromise with evil." "Jasmine, Blake isn't untouchable because he's smart or connected. He's untouchable because people like us make the rational choice to walk away when the cost gets too high." Jasmine reached over and took Raymond's hand. "But what if we don't walk away this time? Then we lose everything." Jasmine smiled, and Raymond recognized the expression from 3 years ago. The look she got when she was about to do something brilliant and terrifying. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe we discover what we're actually capable of when we stop protecting ourselves and start protecting the principles we claim to believe in." Raymond stared at her for a long moment. "You're asking me to destroy my career for a principle. I'm asking you to help me destroy Blake before he destroys anyone else." "How?" Jasmine pulled out her phone and scrolled to Santos's number. "By giving him exactly what he thinks he wants, a public battle where he can demonstrate his power. And then we show him that some people can't be intimidated into silence." She hit call, and Santos answered on the first ring. "Professor? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Jasmine said. "Everything's exactly right. How quickly can you get Blake to threaten me publicly?" "What are you talking about?" Jasmine's smile was sharp as a blade. "I'm talking about setting a trap for a man who thinks he's smarter than everyone else." "And Sergeant Santos? He's about to walk right into it." The next morning, Jasmine stood in the lobby of Riverside City Hall, wearing her most conservative suit and her most dangerous smile. Word had spread quickly through the small town. The law professor was back, and she was asking for a meeting with the full city council. By 9 a.m., the lobby was packed with curious residents, nervous officials, and reporters who sensed a story about to break wide open. Chief Deputy Blake appeared at precisely 9:15, flanked by 2 other officers and radiating the kind of controlled authority that had served him well for years. He approached Jasmine with his political smile firmly in place. "Professor Coleman, I'm surprised to see you still in town." "Are you?" Jasmine's voice carried clearly across the lobby, and she could see phones being raised to record the conversation. "I would think you'd expect me to stay and fight for my principles, even when fighting becomes inadvisable." The threat was subtle but clear, and Jasmine could see Blake's satisfaction as murmurs rippled through the crowd. He thought he was demonstrating his power, showing the community that even outside agitators would eventually back down when faced with superior force. "Inadvisable for whom?" Jasmine asked. "For me? Or for people who abuse their authority and hope no one notices?" Blake's smile tightened. "Professor, I think your recent troubles at Georgetown demonstrate the dangers of overreaching. Perhaps it's time to return to your academic work and leave law enforcement to the professionals." Jasmine felt the moment crystallizing around her. Blake had just made his biggest mistake. He'd threatened her publicly, in front of witnesses, while implying that her professional troubles were his doing. Everything that happened next would be on the record. "Chief Deputy Blake," Jasmine said, her voice carrying the authority of 15 years in lecture halls. "Are you suggesting that my civil rights lawsuit is connected to my employment issues at Georgetown?" "I'm suggesting that people who make false accusations often find themselves facing scrutiny in return." "False accusations." Jasmine nodded slowly. "Would you like to clarify exactly which of my accusations you consider false? The racial profiling? The constitutional violations? Or the broader pattern of corruption in your department?" Blake's composure cracked slightly. "Professor Coleman, I'd be very careful about making accusations you can't prove." "Would you?" Jasmine reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Because I think we should discuss what constitutes proof in a court of law." She opened the folder to reveal printed emails, financial records, and incident reports, all from the flash drive Santos had provided, but also something more. Additional documents she'd spent the night obtaining through her contacts at the Justice Department, the Virginia State Police, and 3 federal agencies that had been quietly investigating Blake's activities for months. Blake's face went pale as he recognized some of the documents. "Where did you get those?" "From sources within your own department," Jasmine said clearly. "It seems you're not as popular among your colleagues as you thought, Chief Deputy Blake." Around the lobby, the crowd was pressing closer, phones recording every word. Jasmine could see Mayor Henley pushing through the crowd, her face a mask of professional panic. "Professor Coleman," the mayor called out, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Jasmine said firmly. "I think the people of Riverside deserve to hear this publicly. Chief Deputy Blake has just threatened me for exercising my constitutional rights, and I think they should know what kind of man has been running their police department." Blake stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that still carried clearly in the silence. "Lady, you have no idea what you're messing with. I can destroy you, your career, your boyfriend, everyone you care about. One phone call, and you're finished." The lobby erupted. Voices raised in shock, in anger, in disbelief. Jasmine could see residents looking at Blake with new eyes, could see the careful political coalition he'd built for years beginning to crack. But more importantly, she could see federal agent Sarah Ken stepping through the crowd, her badge clearly visible, her recorder already running. "Chief Deputy Blake," Agent Ken said calmly. "I'm Agent Ken, FBI Civil Rights Division. Would you mind repeating what you just said about destroying Professor Coleman's career?" Blake spun around, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and terror. That's not. I was taken out of context. It seemed pretty clear to me," Agent Ken replied. "And I believe we have it all on record. Chief Deputy Blake, you're under arrest for civil rights violations under color of law, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and witness intimidation." As Agent Ken began reading Blake his rights, Jasmine felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Santos, now in civilian clothes, her own badge nowhere to be seen. "I quit this morning," Santos said quietly. "Handed in my resignation and every piece of evidence I had to Agent Ken. Turns out the FBI has been investigating Blake's operation for 8 months." Jasmine stared at her. 8 months? Your arrest yesterday was just the catalyst they needed to move. Blake threatening you publicly gave them everything they needed for a federal case. Santos smiled grimly. "Turns out you weren't his first victim, Professor. Just his most dangerous." Around them, the lobby was chaos. Blake was being led away in handcuffs. Cooper was demanding answers nobody could give him. And Mayor Henley was trying desperately to control the narrative. But Jasmine's attention was on Raymond, who was pushing through the crowd toward her with an expression of awe and admiration. "Jasmine," he said when he reached her. "How did you know?" "I didn't," she admitted. "I just knew that men like Blake can't resist demonstrating their power when they think they're winning. And I gambled that someone somewhere was already watching." Raymond shook his head. "You took an incredible risk. If the FBI hadn't been here, I'd have found another way," Jasmine said. "Some battles are worth losing everything for, Raymond. This was one of them." Agent Ken approached them as the crowd began to disperse. "Professor Coleman, we'll need your testimony for the federal case. And I have to say, what you did here took remarkable courage." "What I did here was get angry and refuse to back down," Jasmine replied. "But Agent Ken, I'm hoping this is just the beginning." "How do you mean?" Jasmine looked around the lobby, at the shocked faces of residents learning for the first time what had been happening in their name, with their tax dollars under their noses. "I mean that Blake's arrest is just the first step," she said. "Now comes the hard part, rebuilding a police department that serves the community instead of exploiting it. And I'd like to help with that process." Santos stepped forward. "Professor, what if I told you the city council was prepared to offer you a consulting position to oversee police reform?" Jasmine felt Raymond's hand slip into hers, felt the weight of a decision that would change everything about her carefully planned academic life. "I'd say," she replied, "that some opportunities are too important to pass up." 3 months later, Jasmine stood before the Riverside City Council in a room packed with residents, reporters, and law enforcement officials from across the state. The preliminary report on police reform was ready. Blake's trial was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, and the changes had already begun. But tonight wasn't about celebrating victory. Tonight was about confronting the hardest truth of all. "We've made significant progress," Jasmine began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room. "We've implemented new training protocols, established independent oversight, and created channels for community input. But there's one issue we haven't addressed directly, and it's time we did. She paused, looking out at faces she'd come to know over the past 3 months. Santos, now serving as interim sheriff while the department restructured. Cooper, who'd taken early retirement rather than face federal investigation. Raymond, who'd relocated his practice to Riverside to work on police reform full-time. And Agent Ken, who'd become an unexpected ally in the broader fight for justice. The issue is this, Jasmine continued. Blake's corruption wasn't an anomaly. It wasn't the result of one bad officer who went off the rails. It was the predictable outcome of a system that prioritized loyalty over accountability, authority over service, and political connections over constitutional principles. She clicked to her first slide, showing statistics from Riverside's police department over the past 5 years. Blake didn't create this system. He simply exploited it more skillfully than others had before him. A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the comfortable narrative they'd been telling themselves. That Blake was an aberration, a cancer that could be cut out to restore the department's health. Which means, Jasmine said, that unless we change the underlying system, we'll get another Blake. Maybe not next year, maybe not in 5 years, but eventually. Because the incentives that created him are still in place. Mayor Henley shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Professor Coleman, are you suggesting that our entire city government is corrupt? I'm suggesting that corruption thrives in environments where accountability is optional and power is unquestioned, Jasmine replied. And I'm suggesting that Riverside, like hundreds of small towns across America, has created exactly that kind of environment. She clicked to her next slide, showing a web of connections between local officials, business leaders, and law enforcement. Blake's power came from relationships. Political favors, financial arrangements, mutual protection pacts. He wasn't operating alone. He was operating within a network of people who benefited from the status quo. State Senator David Cameron stood abruptly. Professor Coleman, I object to these implications. You're painting an entire community as complicit in criminal activity based on. Senator Cameron, Jasmine interrupted, her voice sharp with professional authority. You received campaign contributions from 3 businesses that Blake was protecting from health. Department investigations. Your staff coordinated with Blake's office to suppress domestic violence reports involving your political allies. Would you like me to continue? The room fell silent. Cameron's face flushed red, but he sat down without responding. Jasmine felt the familiar thrill of a complex case reaching its resolution, but this time it was tempered with something deeper. A sense of responsibility for the community she'd come to care about. I'm not here to destroy anyone, she said, her tone softening. I'm here to offer you a choice. We can implement surface-level reforms and hope for the best, or we can do the harder work of changing how power operates in this community. She clicked to her final slide, a comprehensive reform proposal that went far beyond police procedures to address campaign finance, government transparency, and community oversight. This isn't just about law enforcement, Jasmine said. It's about creating a system where Blake's kind of corruption becomes impossible because the community won't tolerate it. An elderly man in the back row stood up. Professor, what you're describing sounds like you want to turn our whole town upside down. Jasmine considered the question seriously. Mr. Henderson, how many of you knew that Blake was skimming from drug seizure funds? How many knew about evidence tampering? How many knew about the surveillance of political opponents? Uncomfortable silence filled the room. The system worked exactly as designed, Jasmine continued. It kept you in the dark while protecting the people in power. So yes, I want to turn that system upside down. I want to create transparency where there was secrecy, accountability where there was impunity, and community control where there was political manipulation. Santos stepped forward. Professor Coleman, what you're proposing, it's not just police reform. It's a complete reimagining of local government. Exactly, Jasmine said. Because Blake's corruption was a symptom, not the disease. And treating symptoms without addressing the underlying condition just guarantees that the disease will return. Raymond rose from his seat in the audience. Jasmine, what you're describing would require years of sustained effort, constant vigilance, and probably more fights like the one we just finished. Jasmine looked at him, seeing the question beneath his words. After 3 months in Riverside, after watching her transform from academic observer to community advocate, he wanted to know if she was really prepared to stay, to build something new instead of returning to the safety of Georgetown. Yes, Jasmine said simply. It would require all of that and more. And you're prepared to take that on? Jasmine thought about her conversation with Georgetown's administration the previous week. They'd offered her a return to full professorial status, complete vindication of the ethics charges, and a substantial research grant to study police reform from the comfortable distance of academic theory. She'd turned it down. Raymond, 3 months ago, I thought I understood how systems worked. I thought I could study them from the outside, analyze them, and recommend changes that other people would implement. Jasmine looked around the room at faces that had become familiar, friends, colleagues, partners in the work of justice. But I was wrong. Some changes can only be made from the inside, by people willing to stay for the long fight. Agent Ken stood up from her seat near the front. Professor Coleman, the Justice Department would like to offer Riverside as a pilot program for community-led police reform. Full federal support, additional resources, and the opportunity to create a model for other communities. Jasmine felt the weight of the moment, not just for herself, but for every small town struggling with the same issues, every community where power had become concentrated in the wrong hands, every place where justice was a luxury that some people couldn't afford. Agent Ken, we accept, Jasmine said. On one condition. What's that? Jasmine smiled, looking directly at Santos, then at Raymond, then at the packed room of people who'd chosen to engage rather than retreat. The model we create has to work not just for towns like Riverside, but for communities everywhere. Because Blake's corruption wasn't unique, and our solution can't be either. As the room erupted in applause, discussion, and the messy democracy of people figuring out how to govern themselves, Jasmine felt Raymond's hand slip into hers. So, he said quietly, ready to change the world? Jasmine squeezed his hand, thinking about all the Blakes still out there, all the communities still struggling with corruption, all the fights still waiting to be fought. One town at a time, she replied, starting with this one. 6 months later, Jasmine stood in the parking spot outside the Riverside Civic Center, where this journey had begun. The area was no longer a fire lane. The city had redesigned the entire traffic flow around the building to better serve community events. But more importantly, the building itself had been transformed into something Blake would never have tolerated, a genuine center for community engagement. Ready? Raymond asked, adjusting his tie as they prepared to enter the building for the graduation ceremony of Riverside's first community police academy, a program that trained citizens to understand law enforcement while teaching officers to see policing as community service. Almost, Jasmine replied, checking her phone one last time. The message she'd been waiting for had finally arrived. Blake was sentenced this morning. 12 years federal prison, full restitution, lifetime ban from law enforcement. Santos sends her congratulations. Raymond whistled softly. 12 years. That's more than we expected. He earned every day of it, Jasmine said, though she felt no satisfaction in Blake's downfall. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring that systems worked for everyone, not just the powerful. As they walked toward the building, Jasmine reflected on the changes 6 months could bring. Santos had been officially elected sheriff in a landslide, running on a platform of transparency and community partnership. Cooper had moved to Florida, selling his house quietly and leaving no forwarding address. The city council had adopted every reform Jasmine had proposed, plus several that community members had developed themselves. But the most significant change was personal. Jasmine had accepted a joint appointment, half-time at Georgetown, half-time as director of the Riverside Institute for Justice, a new organization funded by the Justice Department to research and implement community-led police reform. She'd kept her academic credentials while gaining something she'd never had before, the opportunity to implement her theories in real time. And Raymond had become not just her partner in this work, but her partner in life. They'd bought a small house on the edge of town, close enough to the civic center for Jasmine's work, far enough from the station for Raymond's private practice. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was the life they'd chosen together. Inside the civic center, the auditorium was packed with the first graduating class of the Community Police Academy. 50 residents who'd completed 8 weeks of training in constitutional law, de-escalation techniques, community mediation, and police accountability. They'd learned how to file complaints, how to serve on oversight boards, and how to build partnerships between law enforcement and the communities they served. Jasmine took the podium, looking out at faces that had become familiar over months of classes, discussions, and sometimes heated debates about the role of police in a democratic society. 6 months ago, she began, I was arrested in this building's parking lot for allegedly parking in a fire lane. The officer who arrested me was convinced he was enforcing the law. I was convinced he was violating my civil rights. We were both right. Scattered laughter rippled through the audience. The officer was technically correct about the parking violation, even though the circumstances made his enforcement inappropriate. I was correct about the constitutional violations, even though I had technically violated a municipal ordinance. Jasmine paused, letting the complexity settle. Justice isn't about determining who's right and who's wrong. It's about creating systems where everyone can be held accountable for their actions while maintaining their fundamental rights and dignity. She looked directly at several police officers in the audience, new recruits trained under Santos's reformed protocols, veterans who'd chosen to adapt rather than retire, and even a few from neighboring departments who'd come to observe. What we've built here in Riverside isn't perfect, Jasmine continued. We still have disagreements, conflicts, moments when our ideals collide with messy reality. But we've created something that didn't exist 6 months ago, a community where both police and residents understand that they're working toward the same goal: safety, justice, and mutual respect. Agent Ken, who'd become a regular visitor as the federal pilot program expanded, raised her hand. Professor Coleman, the Justice Department is ready to implement the Riverside model in 12 additional communities across 6 states. Are you prepared for that expansion? Jasmine felt the familiar thrill of a challenge that seemed impossible until it became inevitable. Agent Ken, I think you should ask the graduates that question. She gestured toward the community members who'd completed the academy. They're the ones who'll be training their counterparts in other towns, sharing what they've learned, helping other communities adapt our model to their specific needs. An older woman in the front row stood up. Professor, when this started, I thought you were just another outsider coming in to tell us how to run our town. I want to apologize for that assumption, and thank you for showing us that we had more power than we realized. Jasmine smiled, remembering her first community meeting where residents had been polite but skeptical of the Georgetown professor, who claimed she could help fix their police problems. Mrs. Patterson, you don't owe me any apology. Skepticism of outsiders claiming to have easy answers is a healthy response. What changed wasn't your skepticism. It was my understanding that real change has to come from within communities, not from academic experts or federal mandates. Raymond stood up from his seat in the audience. Jasmine, there's one more announcement. Jasmine looked at him curiously. This wasn't part of the planned program. Georgetown University has established the Jasmine Coleman Fellowship for Community-Engaged Legal Scholarship, Raymond said. Full funding for law students who want to work directly with communities on police reform, voting rights, and civil rights implementation. Jasmine felt her eyes welling up. She'd sacrificed her comfortable academic career for this work, never expecting recognition from the institution she'd left behind. The fellowship will be administered jointly by Georgetown and the Riverside Institute, Raymond continued, ensuring that future lawyers are trained not just in legal theory, but in the practical work of making justice accessible to everyone. As applause filled the auditorium, Jasmine thought about the students who'd benefit from this fellowship. Young lawyers who'd understand from the beginning that justice wasn't something that happened in courtrooms, but something that had to be built community by community, relationship by relationship, one conversation at a time. Santos approached the podium as the applause died down. Before we conclude tonight, I want to read something that arrived at the station this morning. She pulled out a letter. This is from Chief Deputy Russell Blake, currently serving his federal sentence. He asked me to read it publicly. Jasmine tensed. Even from prison, Blake was trying to manipulate the narrative. Professor Coleman, Santos read, I write this not to apologize, my crimes are unforgivable, but to acknowledge that you were right about everything you said in that lobby 6 months ago. I abused my authority, corrupted my department, and betrayed the trust of the community I swore to serve. The system you've built to replace what I destroyed gives me hope that other communities won't have to experience what Riverside did under my leadership. I hope the work you're doing serves as a warning to other officers who might be tempted to follow my path, and as inspiration to communities who refuse to tolerate corruption in any form. Santos folded the letter. He also included a complete confession to crimes we weren't aware of and requested that it be forwarded to appropriate authorities in 3 other jurisdictions where he'd previously served. Jasmine felt a complex mixture of emotions. Blake's letter couldn't undo the harm he'd caused, but it demonstrated something important about accountability. Sometimes the most powerful deterrent to corruption was the certainty that it would eventually be exposed and punished. As the ceremony concluded and people began to file out, Jasmine stood in the same spot where she'd been arrested 6 months earlier. But now she wasn't alone. Raymond was beside her, Santos was shaking hands with academy graduates, Agent Ken was discussing expansion plans with community leaders, and the building buzzed with the kind of productive energy that came from people working together toward common goals. Her phone buzzed with a text from Georgetown. Faculty meeting next week to discuss making the community engagement model mandatory for all law students. Your experience has changed how we think about legal education. Thank you for showing us what's possible. Jasmine smiled, thinking about how much had changed since that moment when Cooper's handcuffs had clicked around her wrists. She'd lost the comfortable certainty of academic distance, but gained something infinitely more valuable. The knowledge that systems could change, that communities could heal, and that justice wasn't just a theory to be studied but a practice to be lived. So, Raymond said, slipping his arm around her waist as they watched the last of the academy graduates leave the building. What's next? Jasmine looked out at the parking lot where a new sign read Riverside Institute for Justice, Community Engagement Center, and thought about the 12 communities that would soon be implementing their model, the students who'd receive fellowships to continue this work, and all the Blakes who might think twice before abusing their authority. What's next, she said, is making sure this becomes so normal, so expected, so integrated into how communities operate that no one can imagine police departments functioning any other way. Raymond kissed her temple. Think we can do that? Jasmine thought about everything they'd accomplished in 6 months, everything they'd learned about the power of communities to transform themselves, everything she'd discovered about her own capacity to choose principle over safety. I think, she said, we've already started. As they walked toward their car, Jasmine's phone rang. A community organizer from Detroit, asking if the Riverside model could work in an urban environment. The next town, the next fight, the next opportunity to prove that justice wasn't a luxury but a necessity, not a privilege but a right. Jasmine Coleman answered the call. What did this story teach you about the power of standing up for your principles, even when the cost seems too high? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world. ***.